So this evening we're talking about awakening, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I was a kid growing up, I had the same dream periodically for a number of years, and maybe you can relate to this, but I would dream that I was falling, all right? And sometimes it would just be like over a cliff, and I would just be on my back, and you could just feel yourself falling and falling and falling and falling. And then every now and then I would be falling and I would just like drop into water and I would just be sinking into the water. And every single time I had this dream, I would wake up and maybe you can relate to this part, like my body would physically move, like in bed, like I'd shake. And now, even now that I'm married, I share a bed with someone and I'm sometimes like I do this, it happens and I'm like, man, I wonder if I hit her in the arm or something. Like, she's not letting me know yet, but maybe it's happened. But maybe, I don't know if you've ever been woken up from a dream that maybe you wish you hadn't woken up from. Right? You had this dream, you're like, oh wait, shoot, like I was just about to do this thing and it was cool, and now I don't even know how it ends. It's like a movie you don't get to finish. I would sleepwalk when I was a kid. I don't think I do it anymore, at least no one's told me. But I would sleepwalk, and this one particular time, I went into the kitchen. I grabbed a jar of jelly, and I opened it up, and I rubbed jelly all over my legs. And then I got into bed, and I don't remember any of this. All I remember is waking up the next day, and there was jelly, like, caked in my leg hair. I wish someone would have woke me up before I did that, because it was a mess, and it was gross, and it was kind of weird, like, awkward. Like, what do you do with that? How do you explain that to your family? Like, I have jelly all over me. My bad, Mom, I don't know what happened to my sheets. They're stained with jelly. How many of you have siblings? Brothers, sisters? How many of you, you get along with your siblings, it's just amazing. Like, it's a beautiful relationship. Someone could write poems about your relationship with your siblings. All right, so how many of you don't have that? It's like the exact opposite. Like there's tension, there's fighting, there's arguing, there's this beautiful relationship of tension. That was me growing up. And just a few weeks ago, I shared a story about my brother and how he pinned me down and he spit in my mouth, and that was awesome. I can still taste it. It was not awesome. I'm being sarcastic. That's something you're going to learn about me, fairly sarcastic. Anyway, so my younger sister, we were on our way to the sledding hill, all right? And we were arguing before we left as to who was going to carry the sled. Now, I'm a little older than you, and so we had these really old school sleds, and it was like those metal ones you see in cartoons, right? It's like a wood top and metal bottom, right? That thing. Anyway, we were arguing as to who was going to carry that because it was a little heavy. And I won that argument because I had this plan that I was going to make her carry it there, and we'll just see how it plays off on the way back, right? Anyway, so she drags it there. We're sledding. We're having a good time. I go down the hill a few times. This one particular time, I hit some kind of a bump or a jump or something like that. I go flying off the sled, and I land right on my shoulder, and my bone pops out, right? Like this snaps, like my collarbone, clavicle, right? Now, I can feel it, so I know that something broke. I know that, and it's obviously painful. So I'm trying to convince my sister, because we now have to leave and go home. I'm trying to convince her, listen, I have a broken bone. See, it's sticking out. I shouldn't. That wasn't my original plan, but it worked, right? I didn't have to carry the sled home because she felt bad for me. Well, anyway, I get back. This is the relationship I have with my brother. I get back. I'm talking to my brother about it because my mom's not home, and I'm like, I think I got to go to the doctor, look at my bone, right? He looks at it, and he's like, it's not broken. He takes my arm, and he starts yanking it around. I mean, if I was older, I would have, throat punched him, but I'm not. I'm 7 years younger, and so I had nothing. So I'm screaming my head off, dude, I think there's a broken bone. So obviously he believed me. He called my parents, and that's the end of the story. Some of us have relationships with siblings like that, maybe, where sometimes there's tension, sometimes we screw around, sometimes we get at each other, or we don't believe each other, whatever it may be. Now, there's a story in the Bible that's going to kind of help take us in a certain path this evening. About two brothers that didn't get along. They were very different, too. You had one brother whose name was Esau, and he was older than his younger brother named Jacob. And Esau was kind of like he took after his father. He wanted to care for the family by providing for it. with like bringing home meat, and he was a hunter and wanted to provide that way. They also describe him as a really hairy dude. And so he's got hair all over him. Maybe extra hairy. I don't know why, but in the telling of this story, they thought it was important to communicate that he was hairy. So he's a hairy dude. Then Jacob, who's not hairy, and takes after his mom and likes to do things around the house and maybe prepare meals and things like that. And so those are the differences between Esau and Jacob. And in that tradition, Esau was to get this amazing blessing from his dad as his father would pass on, as his father would pass away. Well, he was at the end of his life, and he's on his deathbed. And both brothers know that this is the time where he would get this blessing, he would get this gift. There was riches involved with this blessing, and Esau was to get this. Now Jacob was envious, and he wanted all that Esau was to get. And so what did he do? He came up with a plan, and he actually came up with this plan with his mom. And so his mom was in on this idea of stealing the blessing from his older brother, right? Like, this is crazy. This is a little dysfunctional, this family. And so what he does is he goes out and he gets the skins from animals that Esau has probably killed. And he puts them all over his arms. Now their father, like I said, he's on his deathbed and he can't really see well anymore. And so this plan would work. Right? He would go in and he had this bowl of stew that was his father's favorite. And he presented it to him as if he was Esau, and he was there to receive this gift, receive this blessing. And he tricked his dad. And his dad even said, you feel like Esau, right? Like his dad knew something was up. Like he felt like something is different. Why? Because his voice sounded different. So he touched his hands and his arms, and he says, you feel like Esau, but you sound like Jacob. But at the end of the day, he went ahead and gave Jacob, who he thought was Esau, the blessing. Well, here's the deal. Jacob steals this from his older brother, and now what does older brother want to do? I want to take you out, right? So that's exactly what he's afraid of. And so his mother and Jacob, they come up with this plan, and he runs away. And he runs away, and the story picks up here where he gets to a certain place to lay down, and he falls asleep. So he gets far enough away where he felt like it was a safe place to be. He lays down, and he puts a rock under his head, which I don't know why it was a rock. Like, I feel like he had a bag that had some soft stuff in it. But anyway, he puts a rock down. He lays down on the rock, and he falls asleep. And in the midst of him falling asleep, he has this dream, and this dream's got this ladder that goes up to the heavens. And it's got messengers of God who walk up to the ladder. They look up it, they climb up it, they look into the heavens, and then they climb back down. And then he wakes up. And Jacob has this moment that he says, it's as if God has been here all along, and I wasn't aware of it. And Jacob has this moment where he realizes that right there in that moment, in the place that he was at, he realized that God was present. And he never even knew it. He wasn't aware of it. And this is what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about waking up to God's presence. That oftentimes we go through life and we don't even realize and know that God is with us. Yet the scriptures, the Bible talks all about it, that God is always there. But most of the time we're just like Jacob and we're not aware of it. If you look in Psalm, it's on the screen, Psalm chapter 139, it talks about this very thing. It's coming up. Where can I go from your spirit? Oh, here we go. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. Next slide. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, and the darkness is as light to you. And this idea that we can't go too far away from God, that God will always be there. I can run to the north and I can run to the south or the east or the west, but God will always be present. And just like we see in the story of Jacob, oftentimes we're unaware of it. Jacob builds this altar and he pours oil on it because it was to signify, like, in this moment in my life, God said something to me. He revealed something to me, and I don't want to forget about it. And so in chapter 139 of Psalms, he says that God will always be with us. And in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, never forsake you." It's this idea that God is asking us to not be fearful because his presence is with us. Let me share a story with you. And hopefully it paints this picture and what we're trying to talk about this evening. Some of you may be aware, but many probably don't, but I was a missionary in Mexico for a number of years. My family, we lived in the border of Texas and Mexico for a number of years, and we did mission work. I would drive over the border probably 4 or 5 times a week, and we did all sorts of different projects, but one of the things that I did is I built a relationship with a pastor in a little village just across the border. And we would do things in his village. I did an after-school program where I worked with children. I tutored teenagers and taught them English. And I built this strong friendship with this pastor. And this one particular day, it's about 20 minutes south of the border, and there's one main highway that takes you to and from this village. And as you get to about, I don't know, like let's say halfway there, maybe 10 miles down the road, you have this village that sits right in the middle of this highway. And there's train tracks that go, so I want you to visualize this for me, right? There's train tracks that go across this highway. There's some stores kind of lining up along the side of the highway. There's a restaurant. And in the rural parts of Mexico, they don't have streetlights. They use giant speed bumps. All right, because the giant speed bumps are going to slow you down because they're so big and you're going to break something if you go too fast over them. And so they use all these speed bumps. So as you're nearing into town, you start to slow down so that you can go over and ease over these speed bumps. Now I'm coming back and I'm coming up to town and I'm slowing down. And I'm telling you this because it's important to know that I was driving slowly. Just to add to the picture, I'm in a blue Jeep Cherokee, one of the older ones. Now on my right, there's two lanes. I'm in the left lane. On my right, there's this big, giant green tractor. All right, one of those, I don't know what they are. It was a big green thing. It was huge, and I couldn't see around it. All right, and so I'm trying to pass it, and just beyond this big green tractor, there's a car that I don't know that's there. It's a small little car, and he's trying to make a left and to come in the opposite direction as I am coming, right? And so he's trying to swing out. And so as I come to pass this green tractor, this car proceeds to pull up, because he was thinking this tractor's going super slow, I can easily make it, but didn't see me, who I was going slightly faster than. He pulls out, and I crush him, right? It didn't hurt him, but I just crushed the car. Like the front wheel pops, and there's no way for him to drive, and he barely goes off the side of the road. And what do I do? Because I grew up here in the United States, and when we get in accidents, we pull over and we handle it, right? We pull over and we talk it out. And so that's what's ingrained in my head, is to pull over and deal with the situation with this gentleman that I ran into. Now, the other thing that's going on in my head is that I know people from Texas. I have friends who have been in this situation before. And what they would encourage me to do in that moment is do everything possible to not let the police be involved. Why? Because the federal police or the local police, they're looking for money. And when they see that you're white and that you have Texas plates, what they really see are green dollars. Because what they want is to make some money on you. And so what they're going to do is they're going to keep you there hijacked until you give them enough money that would satisfy them. And I know this because it happened to people that I knew or that I was friends with. And so the whole time I'm thinking, I do not want the police to be involved. Right? That was number one goal. Number two goal is to get out of there. And so I pull over and we begin to have this conversation. I didn't turn my Jeep off for some reason. I left it running. I got out and I was going to talk to the gentleman, and he walked around me and he got into the front seat of my Jeep and he took the keys out and he put them in his pocket. And then he starts telling me, "You owe me $500. And I was like, what is happening right now? Right? Like, oh my goodness. So, and I'm kind of freaking out, right? I'm kind of freaking out, like what's going to happen? And so I start having this dialogue with him, and I continue to ask him, I just want my keys back. And so for some reason, he took the keys out of his pocket, and he held them up in front of me like this, and he was telling me that you will not get your car back until you give me this $500. And as he was talking, I was like, whoop, and I snatched them, and I put them in my pocket. I'm like, all right, now we can talk. Now I'm okay. We begin to have this conversation, and I keep thinking to myself, the only thing I'm thinking about is don't let the cops get involved. And the second thing I'm thinking about is how do I get out of this situation? And as we're in the midst of this conversation, and my Spanish is really struggling, all of a sudden 2 more cars pull up and 6 guys come out. And they're surrounding me. And now I'm like, oh no. Like this just got really real. And we begin to continue to go back and forth, and now I'm coming up with like schemes, like how can I get out of this situation? Like now I don't even care about anything, but I need to get out, and I need to get out now because they wanted my car, they didn't want me to leave, and they weren't letting me go anywhere. And so I didn't think this was going to work, but I tried it anyway, and I got into the Jeep, and I pretended like I needed to grab something, and I started it up, and I was really just going to slam it in reverse and get out of there and tear off like the movies. As I sat in and I started the car, 2 of the guys kind of walked behind the Jeep and they just kind of stood there like this. I was like, well, that ain't going to work because I'm not going to run someone over in Mexico. So we continued to talk. And then I came up with this idea. I was like, well, maybe they'll send someone across the border with me. And so I asked them, I say, hey, do you have anyone here or a friend or a family member that has their paperwork that allows them to go into the States? I'll take them into the States with me. We'll go to the bank. I'll get the money. And I'll drive them back to the border and they can cross. And they're like, sure, and they're talking. And the whole time I'm thinking, as soon as we get across the border, I'm going to be like, boop, and just pop them right out of my Jeep. Because, like, I don't care. We're in the States now, right? Like I feel safe now to just, like, pop them out and just keep going. I mean, that's what I was thinking. Now, here's a timeout. We're going to pause for a minute. I was supposed to be, like, the good Christian dude, right? And I wasn't thinking that way. I was scared, and I was solely thinking about how can I get out of this situation. So they're calling around, and they couldn't find anyone that could go. And I was like, man, strike 2. So then the third option was that, well, maybe we'll meet someone at the border, and we'll just drive there. So we're about 10 minutes south of the border, and we'll just drive to the border, and we'll all get in our cars, and I'll have someone meet me there with money. And I'm thinking, as soon as we get in the cars, I'm just going to hightail it and just go. Because as soon as I get to the border, there's the Mexican army. And the Mexican army is someone that I could trust. And I could share with them what's going on, and they would believe me, and they would take my side, and it would be like a safe haven for me. So I tell them this story about how, let's go to the border, I'll get money, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, cool, let's do that. And we're all piling in the cars, and then all of a sudden, the gentleman that I hit, he gets into my passenger seat, and 2 of his friends get into my back seat. And I'm like, well, now that's not going to work. Strike 3. So we get in the Jeep, and we're driving north. We got a car in front of me and a car behind me. And we're going towards the border. We get into this conversation, and this gentleman, at first I call my wife, and I'm like, hey, I need money. And I need you to go to the bank and get the money and come. And there was a store that was just across the border, and I need you to meet me in that parking lot. And she's like, okay. So we're driving, and this gentleman, he says to me, he says, there's something different about you. He says, this whole time we've been having this conversation and this argument, you've not gotten mad, you've not gotten frustrated, you've kept your cool. There's something different about you. And it was in that moment that I finally woke up. It was in that moment that it was like God was saying, I am here with you. You do not need to be afraid. It was in that moment that I finally woke up and I was realizing that God is with me, and maybe there's something else going on that I don't need to run from, but that I need to lean into and engage with. And so then we go back and forth and we begin to have a conversation about why I'm here. And he asked me, he says, why are you even in Mexico? And I began to share with him all the different projects that we're doing and the things that I'm doing in Mexico. And he says, no, that's what you're doing, but why are you here? And I said, because I think Jesus wants me to be here. And I began to share about my relationship with Jesus and why I ended up where I'm at that time of my life, and why we do what we do. And by the time we're having this conversation, we've already been in the parking lot parked, and there's this whole group of guys listening in on the conversation. People are kind of hanging in the windows, and there's people in my truck or my Jeep. And we begin to unpack what Jesus has done in my life and why I'm there and doing what we're doing. But it wasn't, I needed to be shook, awake, to see that God wanted to communicate something to this group of people. And in the midst of this accident, in the midst of what I was looking at as like a terrifying situation that I didn't know if I was going to get back at, or I didn't know if I was going to be able to get my Jeep out of the situation, the whole time I'm thinking, I just want to save some money, and I was going to miss out on what God was hoping to do. And then finally he wakes me up and something beautiful happens. And just to tell you the end of the story, I ended up paying him. And then a couple months later, not only was money already like back at me, like people already sent us a bunch of money, and then I was able to repair my Jeep, and like that just took care of that too. Like it just wasn't really that big of a deal. You see, sometimes in life we say these things like where we see something that happens, a moment, and we say like God showed up in that moment and did something cool. But what I'm actually here trying to communicate tonight is that oftentimes like we just forget that God's already there. That God is already here in our midst, and he's hoping that we would just engage with his presence and see something beautiful happen. And so really the question is what do we miss out? I mean, imagine for just a moment, what would it look like in your relationships, in your conversations with your friends, your peers, your parents, your siblings, your coaches, your teachers? What would it look like if you believed that God was in that moment with you? How would it shape the conversation you're having? When you're sitting at lunch and there's stuff going on and there's people everywhere, how would it shape the way you engage and interact with that community, that environment, when all of a sudden you're aware that God's there? Maybe you start to begin to see the people that are alone. What would it look like if we were walking through the halls and we had it on our mind that God is with me, he's walking next to me, and I'm present, I'm fully here, I'm fully alive? Would I see the people that are passing by that are hurting? What are we missing out on when we're not aware that God is with us? See, Moses he was a shepherd at this point, and he was looking for a lost sheep, and he's crawling all over this mountain, and he's looking for this sheep, and all of a sudden he runs into this burning bush, and the bush is not like combusting, it's not burning up, it's just on fire, and all of a sudden it starts talking to him, and then it's God, and God says like, hey Moses, where you're standing is holy ground. Take off your sandals, right? It's this idea that the ground we're standing on now is holy because God is here. How does it shape our life? How does it shape our relationships? How does it change the way we engage with our world when we believe that God is here and we're aware of his presence? I'm going to ask you 3 questions tonight, and I want you to, and they're on your papers. So you can pull your papers out. And as I do this, the band can make their way up. But the first question I want you to wrestle with, and we kind of touched on some of this already, but the first question is do I want God with me all the time? Do I even want God with me all the time? The Bible says that we can't escape God's presence. And we look at this man in the Bible named Jonah, and Jonah was given a task. God said, hey, I want you to go to this group of people, and I want you to tell them about me and my love and my grace and my mercy. And Jonah didn't like that people. You know why Jonah didn't like this people? Because this people killed his family. Right? Or his people. They enslaved them. And so Jonah had a hatred for this people. And God said, go to the people you hate, and I want you to show them my love. And so Jonah did what? He ran away. He ran away, and he gets on a boat, and he sails off in the opposite direction. And what happens in the midst of all that? There's this storm, right? The storm comes in, and it starts crashing, and there's these people on the boat that they've lived their lives on boats. And this storm was so bad that they even were terrified. And they kind of deduced to the fact that it was all because Jonah was on the boat with them. And so what do? They toss him overboard. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Like, just fix the problem, get out. Right? They throw him overboard, and he gets swallowed up by a big old fish. And I know that's like mind-blowing and crazy to think about, but here's the moral of the story. That Jonah couldn't get far enough away from God. And ultimately, he had to turn around and face the very thing that he didn't want to do. God moved in it, and something cool happened. Ask yourself, do I want God with me all the time? Number 2 is, what is keeping me from being present with God? What are the things in your life that are distracting you from the presence of God in your life? You know, for Moses, he was searching, and he was searching, and he was searching. And he was so busy looking for that lost sheep, it took a burning bush to remind him that God was with him. And then God asked Moses to do this great and mighty thing. What distracts you from seeing God's presence in your life? What are those things? And if you don't have the answer now, it's okay, because as we sing a couple more songs in worship, you can continue to work yourself through those questions. And finally, what do I miss out on in life when I fail to realize God is present? What do I miss out on? If God was really here, right now, how would it change the kind of friend that I am? If I was aware of God's presence, how would it change the kind of sibling I am, or the daughter or the son that I am, or the student athlete? How would it change the way I talk with people or to people? And how would it change the way I see people? Isn't that something? I want you to think about that. If we were aware of God's presence in our lives, how would it change the way you see people? The way you see humanity? That there's not colors, there's not genders, but there's humans. That there's beating hearts that long for things, that hope for things, that dream for things. That when we see people's dreams and hopes and the trajectories of their lives, that they're longing to be a part of a community and longing to be heard, would we see these things in people? Or are we distracted by what shoes they're wearing, or the way they do their hair, the way they talk? See, I just wonder, I ask myself the question, if I was more aware of God's presence in my life, would I see people the way He sees people? God knit all of us together. He created us. He made us unique. He made us just as we are. And He loves it. Would I see that? What do I miss out on in life when I fail to realize God is present? So as we sing a couple more songs, pray through that, think through that. Maybe jot something down.
So this next song